And away we go. It's the DFS Early Bird here from Awesemo.com. Dan Strafford, Dave Lockwood along with you on this Friday morning, getting ready for an 8-game NBA slate. Friday, only 8 games, Alfie. I'll take it. I like it. I think we're getting into a nice groove here. 7 to 9 games almost every time we talk. How you doing? Any big plans? Any big plans?
We're not getting into a big groove here, and I'm about to tell you why.
Because
I did a little bit of digging, right? A little.
Is it happening?
Happening? Looking into the future, right? And I said, all right, well, Adam gets to write the deep dive on Thursday, which means he's got Thanksgiving off, which is great. We'll both have Thanksgiving off for sure. And Adam's the type of guy that'll always cover for you in a jam,
Absolutely.
right? Good dude. I'm like, okay, so there's no games, never any basketball games on Thursday or on Thanksgiving. Sorry, but we certainly know that they play on Christmas. And there's 5, but because there's none on Thanksgiving, that means that there are 13 on the Wednesday before it and 14 on the Friday after it. So next week you have 9 on Monday, which is nice, but then 4 on Tuesday, 13, 0, and 14. So yeah, next week gets a little rocky, but then it kind of smooths back out, and we'll be in decent shape. But yeah, that's a tough one.
I'm going to go on record saying there may not be a DFS early bird on Friday after Thanksgiving. I think we might yield to the DFS strategy show from Friday morning as your first taste of that slate.
That might seem reasonable.
I think we might make that executive decision. We'll talk to the powers that be and confirm that for everyone. Let's dive in here. I did a quick scroll through trying to confirm any major injuries that might yield some influence on this slate. I guess Rose and Mirotic pop off a little bit. You have Ibaka, who is out in the last Toronto Raptors game. Do you see any names or notes that are worthy of mention here before we dive into position-by-position analysis?
You took a cursory look, huh?
I didn't dive deep, if you want to go there, but I
glance.
I may have scrolled. I scrolled.
I like that phrase. It's a cursory glance. Dwayne Wade's still out. Serge Ibaka's questionable, which is actually pretty big. That would be pretty big news, right? If Ibaka ends up not playing against Boston, Joval might be interesting against that front court, and then Nick Nurse might not have any choice but to play him. Kawhi Leonard is playing his first of a back-to-back, so that's worth keeping an eye on. Here's another one. Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, he was out Monday with an illness, but then he was out Wednesday with the illness too. So, all right, what's this guy got? He's still questionable. Rondae Hollis-Jefferson is now, questionable with an ankle injury. So, yeah, you have that as well. That could definitely muddy things up in the front court, potentially make Ed Davis a really, really quality play against the unimposing Washington front court. And then you mentioned Derrick Rose. Elfrid Payton remains questionable. Mirotic probable. I think that's pretty much a sure shot to play. And outside of that, that's pretty much it. No one cares about the Costa Kufos, and maybe Willie Cauley-Stein gets a couple minutes, but Dante DiVincenzo, John Henson's out. So nothing big outside of those guys that we just talked about.
All right, let's dive in here as we roll through point guard. And I will ask Dave at the end of this pod, if I do remember, who are some of your favorite plays across all positions are. We go position by position, and we used to in the past in different incarnation of this podcast talk about sort of, top high price guy and maybe a value play at the end. But try to remember to do that here towards the end to get some context about the players that we talk about at each position. MPE does sort of allow for that anyway. But more a pointed question towards the end of the podcast, if I remember. We start at point guard, where we have John Wall up to 9,500 on DraftKings. This guy has seen a ton of minutes. Last time out against Cleveland, blowout, didn't, but still put up 32.75 DraftKings points. Been taking a ton of shots, tons of usage for the Washington Wizards as they've struggled on the year. Then you have Oladipo, Lillard, Drew Holiday, Ben Simmons, who I think we're still sort of jury out on how this entire Philadelphia offense will flow with Jimmy Butler there. Levine, Irving, Kyle Lowry, Mitchell, Rose, and Conley is 7K and above on DraftKings. Who stands out the most? Do you go to the top end with Wall or Oladipo, or do you find point guard to have a bit more value on this slate?
You mentioned Simmons, and I was cautiously optimistic that he'd come in and he things would open up for him. The unfortunate thing about that game was he did what the problem is I can't tell how much of that was Jimmy Butler or not, right? He still saw 11 potential assists on the game. Like, he still saw plenty of work, plenty of minutes, but he was just completely they're just laid back. I mean, it was terrible. And Embiid, got off to a hot start, almost triple doubled in the first half, and then he was clearly struggling. Like, that's when you need someone like Simmons to take over. He still saw 77 touches on the game. He's averaging 80.5 on the season, right? So that's not that big of a difference. I was looking over all of his numbers. I mean, Butler's certainly going to affect him, but the fact that he took 5 shots is more. It's more a. I think it says more about Simmons than it does about Butler arriving, because Simmons basically, if he's not willing to adjust to this and he's not willing to work, then he's just not going to have any value whatsoever. So for now, I'm just going to take back what I said about him potentially benefiting from having another guy that can open things up for him, because I don't even know if he cares to be aggressive or even remotely aggressive right now. But one thing that was very interesting in that game, Dan, is Butler and Embiid really worked the pick and roll. And once they get that going, man, I think things will take off, because you can't really work the pick and roll with Simmons because he's not a threat, right? Like, with the pick and roll, you have the ball handler who can, step back and shoot, or you can get it to the roll man. Well, not with Simmons, right? Not with Simmons. It doesn't work.
Right.
So with Butler, I think that could really help Embiid and work for Butler. But the problem is, if that's the case and Simmons on the floor, what the hell is he going to do? What's he going to do? Right.
I don't know what the answer is there.
Right. Reddit can spot up. Like, there's nowhere to. He's not going to have a role if that's the case, and that's something that we got to watch out for. So that's pretty much what I'm saying about in that situation. And for now, especially against Utah, I just have no problem avoiding it entirely. Simmons is getting cheap, though. He's going to get even cheaper, is my guess. If he has another bad game and drops below 8K, I'm still going to be playing him in tournaments. It only makes sense, right? Because he still is going to have the triple-double upside. But at point guard, you mentioned Wall. Yeah, you're getting huge minutes from the guy. Last game was pretty bad, but he played 21 minutes. They blew him out. That was probably good, though, looking forward, because after you get 21 minutes, Scott Brooks clearly used this as an opportunity, and he had 4 fouls, an opportunity to just give him a bit of a break because of the amount of run he'd been getting. And Brooks had mentioned that he wanted to get him, to cut his minutes back a little bit, which means that, he's played 33 and now 21, so he should be fresh heading into this game. I think he's a little bit expensive, and I'm not sure we want to pay that much for him, but it is a very good spot for John Wall. And it's not like Embiid, who is above 10K, is in a great spot. Davis is. We'll talk about Giannis. Those are the reasons you're going to have a tough time playing Wall, but he is in a good spot. So is Lillard against Minnesota. I mean, that defense doesn't scare you whatsoever, particularly the backcourt. No, actually, all aspects of that defense. They do have Robert Covington now, who is he's not really an elite on-ball defender. He's so much better at getting his hands in passing lanes and just disrupting the overall flow of the offense. But it's not going to affect somebody like Dame. So he's in play. But once again, above 9K, it's going to be tough to fit him. I think you might end up looking to guys like Mike Conley, who is, we're using just DraftKings pricing here for right now. Conley 7K flat against Sacramento. That's a spot that I definitely like. Irving's got a tough matchup with Toronto. I probably fade that, even though I like his price point. Donovan Mitchell we'll talk about him at shooting guard. De'Aaron Fox, tough spot, but he's cheap and he's putting in work. Like, this dude has been great in the pick and roll, where he's getting a lot of his production, a lot of assists. He's scoring quite a bit out of the pick and roll. Mike Conley's pick and roll defense has always been strong, But De'Aaron Fox went out there and dropped 28 and 6 on him earlier this season. So I think Fox is still cheap just regarding his price point. And then I'm also going to be interested to see what D'Angelo Russell's minutes are, right? Because he played 33 minutes against Minnesota and then 24 minutes against Miami in that game that they lost by 13. Dan, if he had any semblance of consistency with minutes, we'd probably be playing a whole lot of him when he's always like low, mid 6K, sometimes below 6K. It's just you're not going to play him with the risk that he might play 24 minutes.
Yep, and this is a Wizards team on the other side that is, 27th in defensive rating and up there in pace as well, top 10 team in pace. So a prime matchup if we do get any sort of word, or I don't think we will specifically on minutes for him, but from a tournament perspective, the upside would be there. You mentioned the injuries, obviously LeVert out with the dislocated foot somehow or another, not doing much damage beyond that. And then you mentioned the RHJ, not specific to the guards, but just simply from a rotation perspective, they're going to need bodies out there that can score. And maybe that is Russell on this slate at 6,600. So somebody to keep an eye on. Any cheap punts here? You may mention that Wade's out. Do you go to Tyler Johnson or somebody else from the Heat that's point guard eligible, or do you see value in moving on to shooting guard at this point?
And Johnson had a season high in scoring, if I recall correctly, last time out. I think he had like 24 points. Let me see. I think it was 24. Yeah, 24 points, 9 for 12 shooting, very efficient. Played 31 minutes. You know, he's played. You look at his playing time recently, he's getting a whole lot. Granted, Goran Dragic was out for some of those games. I think you're probably looking at like 27 minutes for him here. I don't think he's a crazy play. I don't think it's a bad play. He's not going to be at the top of my list, though. There really aren't that many quality punts at point guard, at least not right now. I mean, if injuries happen and things open up, then we can talk. Like, you know, can you consider a Shelvin Mack? Yeah, he's getting good run, 29 plus minutes in 3 straight games. And then we also saw Dylan Brooks go down with that knee injury when he like curled up into a basketball when Embiid tried to pass it through his legs. Yeah, no joke. Grade 2 MCL sprain. I would imagine that Mack is earning more run from that as well. And he's cheap, right? So that's not a bad option right there. You're getting around 30 minutes a game from him. He's not a high upside guy, but if you need someone, I think it's at least viable. And then Darren Collison's another guy who look at his minutes matter when you're getting cheap guys like this, right? Because most of them are not phenomenal per minute producers. So if that's the case, give me as much opportunity as you can. He's played 35 and 36 minutes over his last 2 games, coming off of a scoreless game prior to that. I mean, yeah, there's always risk that Collison can just completely go quiet. But if he plays 36 minutes, it's very rare that he's going to kill you at that price point, Dan. And I think just because he has the minute ceiling around 35, you have to give him some consideration. Hell, I'd play him over Spencer Dinwiddie, who has been pretty decent, but is still almost 6K on DraftKings. Like I'd still take Collison over him, and I think that 45 is a very reasonable price point.
All right, we don't need to spend too much time on this question. We're going to preface it with that.
All right,
Mudiay, Ntilikina, or Alonzo Trier?
You don't have to worry about me spending too much time on this one, guy.
I know. Which one are you taking? One of the 3.
Well, I mean, Ntilikina has basically lost his starting spot because he's been so bad as a shooter. I think you probably lean Mudiay, but the problem is also that there's just way too. I don't know. Look at the minutes; they're all over the place for everybody, right?
Yep. I'm going Trier. I'm going Trier here just for the
yeah, I probably would too.
The nuclear option. I know Mudiay's had that in his career, but I think
you're probably right. You're probably right.
It's a mess.
There's really no like reliable answer there because one day Trier could play 32 and then Mudiay plays 28 the next, and then Ntilikina's back in the starting lineup playing 30. So I don't have much of an idea, but I think you're right. Trier is probably the most, at least consistent amongst a bunch of inconsistent players.
Let's take our talents to shooting guard. Up next with Oladipo at the top. You then get Kawhi with the MPE between shooting guard and small forward. Drew Holiday, Bradley Beal is one of those few and far between shooting guard only players on DraftKings. Let's see, you have to scroll all the way down to Dotson before you get another shooting guard only player on DK. So he's at 81. Levine, Butler, Mitchell. You want to talk about Mitchell, I know, at shooting guard at 7,200. Chris Middleton, Bledsoe at 68 against the Bulls here, but seem to be in a decent spot. Price tag, I think, on its way up, if I remember his price point from a couple of days ago. You want to start here with Mitchell, or do you want to start at the top with Oladipo and Kawhi Leonard?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to point out that with Oladipo, he's been playing really well, but at the same time, it's just really tough to fit him on this slate. It feels like, unless we get a bunch of value, I'm not really sure how we can go ahead and squeeze Oladipo in there. And yeah, he's posted 50 plus in 5 of his last 6. Like that is why his price tag has come up. You're getting the Oladipo that we talked about and hoped for earlier this season. You know, you're getting an Oladipo that, I mean, you just look at his usage rate, it's through the damn roof. 24 shots, 22 shots, 30 shots, 21. And he's racking up the usage, the field goal attempts, and all of that's been great. He's also seeing an uptick in assists as well. And it hasn't come against easy defenses, right? It's come against teams that play either low or middle of the league in pace, Houston, Miami, Philly, and then Houston again, and then Boston where he dropped 50. So I do like Oladipo here, but I have a tough time paying this much for him, Dan. That's just the truth. Can he give you 50 plus here? Yeah, I don't think that's in question. But it's more so, will he give you 50 plus? And is it worth paying this much on a slate where we just have a plethora of options at the top and many good ones as well? Who would you rather have, John Wall, Oladipo, or Lillard? Wall versus Brooklyn, Oladipo versus Miami, Lillard at Minnesota.
I might go Wall.
Yeah?
I know Brooklyn's down in pace, right?
Well, I mean,
I would probably go Dame. Yeah, I think I'll stick with Wall.
All right, but it's tough. It's not really an easy decision, and that's not factoring in Anthony Davis versus the Knicks,
right?
And Giannis Antetokounmpo versus Chicago. You know, if you're fading Giannis or you're fading Davis, you're just hoping that they blow the doors off their opponents, because they're both double-digit favorites. Milwaukee by 13.5. And there's no question those games could blow out. So that would be what you're hoping for there if you're going with those guys. Also, it's weird that while we're at shooting guard, it's weird that Oladipo has gone up in price. He's the highest he's been in over a week, even though he's facing Boston. Because every other player that's faced Boston recently, particularly like these shooting guards, I know he's a small forward, but have come down in price. But Leonard went up, which is kind of strange, especially given that he hasn't really had a great game all season. I mean, he's had some good games, but nothing spectacular. So he's still overpriced there in that spot. You know, I'd go Oladipo over Leonard. Zach LaVine's facing Milwaukee, but you just have such ridiculous usage that at 7,800, you still want to at least keep him on your radar, keep him in your player pool, right? They got toasted by Boston. The guy still played 32 minutes. So, I mean, these are all factors that we definitely have to take into consideration. And Donovan Mitchell is probably going to be, or probably should be on your radar as well. Mitchell's got the same upside as most of these guys in his price range. Did you see, by the way, they lost by 50 points to the Mavericks?
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. So I have some concerns, but I don't think they get torched like that by the Sixers. I mean, it's in Philly. It's a good Philly team, but still, that seems more anomalous than anything else. And I think Mitchell's price is coming down to the point where we have to at least consider him, right? That's really what it comes down to. Like, if a guy gets cheap enough, they're going to be on my radar. If a guy's minutes start climbing, they're going to be on my list. That's really all. It's really what it boils down to. Like Chris Middleton, 6,900. Again, blowout concerns, But at sub 7K, Middleton is a very solid play. And honestly, I might even prefer him over Donovan Mitchell.
What do we make of some of the cheaper mid-tier guys here? Buddy Hield, Andrew Wiggins, obviously with Jimmy Butler out the door. He's seen a ton of minutes on the year, surprisingly for a Tom Thibodeau player, but 38 minutes last time out, back on the 14th. Went just 8 of 22, but had 3 steals, a block, 4 assists, 6 rebounds. So filling the stat sheet otherwise with 23 points at 45.5 DraftKings points at 6,100 here in the matchup with Portland. And then you have Buddy Hield, a little bit more expensive by 100 at 6,200. Has had a downtick in minutes over the past 2 games, a blowout loss to the Lakers and a win over the Spurs. Do you see either Hield or Wiggins on your radar for Friday?
Yeah, there's another guy in that price range too. Hield, I'll probably pass here because I think this game, you see it slow down in pace, so the peripherals are going to be tougher. And he's starting to see some of that regression in the rebounding department that was probably inevitable. And then with Wiggins, Wiggins is kind of interesting. Portland's defense, I have a lot of respect for. Ever since Damon and McCollum kind of figured things out, like they were getting lost on switches and just had no idea what was going on 2 years back, even at the beginning of last year. They figured things out quite a bit. Wiggins is a fine play, but he's really it's a price play, right? 6,100. I think it's a fair enough price where I would consider Wiggins in a game that I expect to stay really competitive. That's one reason I like this game a lot, right? Portland's favored by 1.5 points, but it's a pace-up game for Portland, by the way. I just think overall it's a pretty favorable game from a fantasy standpoint because I don't see it blowing out. But I did, before we move on, just want to point out Tim Hardaway. His last 2 games have been big blowouts, right? OKC smashed him and Orlando rocked them. That game wasn't competitive from opening tip, but you still are getting a ton of shots from Hardaway up. And you'll probably see some Drew Holiday defense and such, but when you got a guy that's shooting as many times as he has, who's seen his price come down below 7K for the first time since October, he's a tournament option that has plenty of upside, and we've seen him do it before. So it feels like there are so many of them on this slate where they might not be in the greatest spots based on maybe blowout or matchup, like whether it be Middleton or Hardaway or Mitchell or Levine or Wiggins. Like there's a lot, right? A lot of them. So I think if you're playing, like if you're MMing and you're playing 150, I'd limit exposure and try and work a bunch of them into my lineups. Because we didn't even talk about Bradley Beal. He's probably a bit pricey here. It's just, you get the point. This position's become very, very deep.
Any cheap guys you want to throw out there or ready to move on to small forward?
I think we probably best move on unless you want to play Alan Crabb or something, because we know Karis LeVert's out, but I don't think Crabb really benefits much. He's been seeing the same minutes anyway.
I have no desire to play Alan Crabb, so let's move on to small forward.
Probably a good idea, yeah.
Giannis.
Sorry. Jimmy Butler 7,300. That I know last game was a disappointment, but he clearly didn't want to. It looked like he didn't want to intrude, right? Like he didn't take over late in the game, even though that's why they signed the guy. That's why they traded for him. I get it. It's super risky. First game wasn't great, and there's plenty of bust potential here. But 7,300 on Jimmy Butler, I think the problem with me, Dan, is like I know and you know what Jimmy Butler's capable of doing. So whenever I see him that cheap, the gears start grinding, right? You start thinking, oh wow, $7,300 Butler. What if he actually becomes Jimmy Butler again? Then you're having a really good game from him.
A reasonable point out there. He is also small forward eligible here, and that makes him the 5th most expensive small forward on DK. Giannis, Kawhi, Ben Simmons, Mirotic with the Q tag here, dealing with an ankle coming into the day, but he's not listed on the Pelicans injury report, so I take that back. Just DK not removing it. Obviously, things could change if something goes awry in early game warmups, but I still can't deal with him without a beard. It's so weird seeing his
it is, right?
photo without the scraggly, scrappy beard there. Hardaway Jr. eligible here at 6,700. Obviously, a lot of what Dave said, it's shooting guard pulls over here, depending on how you want to construct your lineups. Wiggins, Tatum, Jabari Parker, JJ Redick, you mentioned earlier as somebody who can spot up and shoot. I think Redick's going to continue to just be an option in tournaments simply because of if he gets hot with all the other options on this team right now, he's going to get fed the ball. And he's not going to be owned. He's maybe in 76er stacks, but you're not going to see a ton of ownership on him simply
he's still
because
a great shooter.
Yep, and can get it done if he gets hot. I think it's more than reasonable at 5,500. But who do you got at small forward? Anybody beyond the shooting guards you already mentioned? I guess we can start with Giannis at the top and go from there.
Giannis is a spectacular play. Again, the only concern here is that he loses minutes in a blowout. That's really the only possibility that I could see him really struggling, right? What isn't there to like about this matchup, really? I couldn't give you many answers, and I don't think you could give me many. It's a bad defense, a bad Chicago defense. Okay, I give you one. Chicago doesn't play at a very fast pace, so there's that. But outside of that, it's too good of a spot, man. And this isn't a Chicago team that I worry too much about from a rim protection standpoint against somebody like Giannis, because Wendell Carter Jr. is probably going to get himself into some early trouble here. I think there's a tough spot for him to really succeed. And it's kind of funny. Like I talked about Jaren Jackson Jr. the other day, how I really like this kid and I'm going to keep playing him in tournaments. And the biggest issue with him is the foul trouble, right? I think we mentioned it on last podcast that he was averaging more than a foul out per 36. So more than 6 fouls per 36 up until a couple days ago. That's a concern. But then you see Jaren Jackson, like against Milwaukee, 5 fouls, only played for 16 minutes, had 22 fantasy points, right? Like his per minute stuff is great, man. But you just tough to handle a guy like Giannis. And I think it's going to be a tough time for anyone to handle him, especially in a game where he's just going. I think he gets plenty of work here. If you're afraid of the blowout, I get it. But I just have a very tough time writing him off because of how dominant he is. And if they do blow him out, it's probably going to have a lot to do with Giannis anyway. I like Middleton, though. That's a nice, if you're looking to pivot but still get exposure to this team, Middleton's really cheap. He certainly isn't Kawhi, but he is a lot cheaper. We've talked about a lot of guys that have multi-position eligibility, so we won't get back into that. Jabari Parker continues to be very cheap, and he continues to play decent minutes. But this is certainly not the most enticing matchup for him whatsoever. And I think probably even at this price point, I don't have a ton of interest. Kevin Knox is another guy where you see his minutes, his recent minutes, and you're feeling pretty good about it. But you have to consider that that these games have been pretty massive blowouts. So how can we really gauge what his playing time is going to look like, right? Kawhi Leonard played 23 minutes in that win over the Knicks. So that was out of, I don't even have to look to see when it got out of hand. So Kevin Knox played 24, 26, and 29 over his last 3 games. I think he's still going to play around 25 minutes, I would hope. And I think he's a fine play because he's cheap at a bad small forward position. But there's certainly some risk associated with playing a guy who, since he has returned, played 9 minutes in the first game, which was competitive. They actually won that game. And then every other game, Dan, has been a blowout. So it's really tough to get a read on what his rotation is going to look like in a competitive one. And it's even more convoluted when you consider they were down so much so early to Orlando that you could have seen the rotations get funkied up in the first half.
Yep. Well, and also it's good to see that he's shooting, and he's not making the shots right now, but he's shooting in double digits over the past 3 games, which Knicks want him to do. You're just not seeing a ton of peripheral stats from him. And down at 4,300, that's not going to matter too much. Obviously, if he has a decent game shooting, maybe up around 45%, taking enough 3-pointers, that should matter as well. You could get a nice upside 26 to 30-point game at a very cheap price point. But from a Knicks fan perspective and from a real upside perspective, adding some steals and some rebounding and some blocks would go a long way to me feeling a lot more comfortable about him being out on the floor and being part of my lineup construction. But
For sure. And get this. I just went through it while you were talking. It gave me a couple seconds to look at it.
That's why I'm here.
In the, my man, in these 3 recent blowouts, he's played 11 minutes in the fourth quarter, and then he's played 15 minutes to end the game and 15 minutes to end the game. You say, oh, well, that's good, right? Well, not really, given that, Mario Hezonja was also playing 15 minutes to close out the game, right? It's concerning. So I really don't have a good grasp on what his minutes are going to look like. I can tell you this much, that let's take his last game, for example. Sometimes you can gauge from the first half what it would look like if it was competitive in the first, but even that's not necessarily true if they look horrible in the first half. Kevin Knox played 6.5 minutes the first rotation, and then 7 minutes and 15 seconds. So that's pacing him. What did I say? 6.5 and 7:15. So it's pacing him for around 28 minutes if he sees that. So that's good. And if that's the case, then I think Kevin Knox does end up being a pretty solid play.
For those who are wondering, on this date yesterday in U.S. history, Billy Idol became a U.S. citizen. Good for Billy Idol. Sorry, just scrolling through Twitter.
Good stuff.
Also a nice day for a white wedding. Let's continue on here to power forward. You've talked about Giannis. You mentioned AD at the top, just talking about the more expensive players. Again, listen, blowout concern, sure. You're going to hear a lot of people saying that the Pelicans are going to blow the Knicks out, so don't play AD. If they blow out the Knicks, it's going to be because Anthony Davis goes 2020. Like, I don't see how he doesn't in this matchup. Maybe not 2020. That's a bold number, but double-double seems inevitable here for Anthony Davis, save him breaking something, him hurting himself in some way. 11-4 is expensive, and not in the sense that he doesn't have the upside to even push that price tag, but when you look at the rest of the slate, it's going to be difficult to roster AD and get into a balanced lineup from there. How do you see power forward, which has been a struggle this year, really shake out? We have the Ibaka potential out. We have the RHJ potential problem here. I know Marcus Morris was sick and should be questionable for Friday. Is it Siakam, like at 6K is now his price point has come up. I don't know what to think of power forward. What do you got here?
Well, yeah, just quickly on Davis. The problem with Davis is that he's priced where a double-double, you don't want a double-double.
Right.
Like, you need a whole lot more than a double-double. You need a lot. He's very expensive, and he should be very expensive. But man, how do you not like him in this spot? How do you not have interest in Anthony Davis in this spot? The Knicks have not done a good job of rim protection. If Enes Kanter is in there for any bit of time that Davis plays, he's going to get slapped silly on the defensive end. There's no question. This really just comes down to how much Davis feels like playing and how much he feels like deferring to the rest of his team. Because in close games, if the Knicks were decent offensively in this game, we expected to stay close, Davis would just be an absolute lock. But even with that said, how do you not like him here? How do you not have interest in Anthony Davis in what could be a monster smash spot? Imagine the Knicks do keep this close, right? Imagine they do keep it competitive and Davis ends up.
I'm sorry. What?
I know. I get it, but you know what? Basketball's strange.
Yes,
the Suns just blew out the Spurs by 20 points, and you could say Spurs aren't good. They're still coached by Greg Popovich, and they still have some quality players on there. They shouldn't be losing to the Spurs by 20 points, right? We've seen a bunch of oddities happen just this year alone, and it hasn't just happened once or twice. It's actually happened quite a bit. So it's not crazy to me to think that maybe they do keep it close. New Orleans is favored by 10, which actually seems pretty soft, if that gives you any idea. So yeah, Anthony Davis is no doubt a great play. It would have been cool if Mirotic was just out for the season, but he's not, and he's playing huge minutes each night. You consider to run him out there because you're getting such good production from him. And I'll go back to my man Jaren Jackson. Look, when Jaren Jackson's not getting in foul trouble. Look, actually, how about this? Jaren Jackson last game got in foul trouble. I mentioned 5 personal fouls, only played 16 minutes, still had 21.5 fantasy points. against Utah, tough matchup, grinded out, slow pace. Played 27 minutes, no foul trouble, 40 fantasy points. Philadelphia only played 11 minutes. But then 33 minutes against Denver, no foul trouble, 40 fantasy points. 32 against Golden State, no foul trouble, 34 fantasy points. When he gets the run and he's not in foul trouble, you're getting a pretty nice ceiling. And I would even say a nice floor from Jaren Jackson Jr. But the problem is you can't look at it that way. You can't say, oh, he has a good floor when he's not in foul trouble, because he gets in foul trouble a lot. So I really like him in this matchup. He's a really talented player. I've said it a lot. He has good instincts. His defense is going to only improve. He's got a 7'4" wingspan. He can block shots incredibly for a power forward. He can get his hands in the passing lanes. He can rack up steals. He can score easily, and he's not a bad rebounder. So you get 30 minutes from Jaren Jackson, you might be looking at a 10 or 14.8 rebound, 3 assist, 3 block, 2 steal game. And I assure you, you'd be happy with that. He's a real good price. And I'm going to keep running him out there in tournaments, because without foul trouble, you get great production. Aside from that, though, it thins out in that range. We've seen Covington's price shoot up overnight after playing a solid game in his first or his debut with the Timberwolves. Played 41 minutes, dude. 41 minutes in regulation. How about that? I think you kind of have to consider him with that type of run. You just do, because you play 41 minutes. Let's say Covington plays 40. I don't think that game went to overtime, right? I'm almost certain it did.
I don't believe so, no.
Yeah. So I'm just checking, because if it did, then no, it didn't go to overtime. You want to listen to Covington's rotation. He plays 8.5 minutes in the first quarter. Second quarter, he plays all 12 minutes. Third quarter, 9 minutes. And then fourth quarter, all 12 minutes. That's crazy run. And a lot of time, the volume and opportunity outweighs just overall skill. And maybe he won't be taking a ton of shots, but he got up 11 last game, jacked up 7 threes. You give me 40 minutes of Covington in a regulation game in his debut with his new team, Dan, it's tough not to consider him a strong play just based on the opportunity alone.
All right, let's close it out with some center talk here. Obviously, you have Anthony Davis eligible here, but we have a ton of centers only, which is nice. Embiid at 10-3 against Rudy Gobert. Towns, Whiteside, Gobert at 7,500. Marc Gasol at 74. Nurkic at 71. Cantor against New Orleans at 65. Julius Randle, 67, I should have said. And then Willie Cauley-Stein is at 64, along with Al Horford. I haven't heard much talk. Joel Embiid doesn't seem to trash talk Rudy Gobert. Is that simply because he doesn't want to deal with the defense that Gobert can bring his way, or doesn't seem to be a target of his social media game?
It's a good question. I don't think he'd really care, though, about – I think if there was any type of beef, then I don't think he wouldn't care. I don't think he would care. I just pulled it up, though. An article on slcdunk.com. It's, SB Nation's Utah Jazz site. It's titled "The Subtle Rivalry Growing Between Rudy Gobert and Joel Embiid." Apparently Rudy Gobert hurt Joel Embiid's feelings.
Wasn't they? Was Gobert involved in the Whiteside BS a couple of years ago?
I don't remember. I don't believe so. But if you do remember, what happened, Embiid shoved Mitchell came up to okay. Mitchell went up for a layup. Embiid kind of bumped him. It didn't get called. And then Mitchell comes up and shoves Embiid, and Embiid dives. Like, it was pretty hilarious. And they got the call. I think something came after that. So let's see. If you're familiar with Rudy Gobert on Twitter, one of his common tweets is to write on to the next one after games. Okay. Okay, so Joel Embiid wrote on to the next one. He tweeted that. Hashtag the process. And then Rudy Gobert said, another loss, we'll figure out how to defend and play together. Hashtag on to the next one. So maybe, and that was prior to Embiid's tweet. So this is, I guess, how he tweets. So he was trolling him.
All right. Well,
he was trolling.
I was wrong.
I guess they got into something. So there is a little something. Oh, and then Rudy Gobert retweeted something basically saying bad things about Joel Embiid. So there you have it, man. There's something.
Right. There's always something. Good on them. Good on them for entertaining us both on and off the court. What do you got here at center?
All right. For some reason, my mic or my headphones muted you for a moment there. Dwight Howard.
Probably for good reason.
Dwight Howard against Brooklyn. I know. It's been tough. Like, it's been really tough to keep running this guy out there. It's not fun, but we do at least have some reasonable excuses, Dan. The last game was a monster blowout. None of the starters played really any minutes. Wall played, what did I say, 23 minutes, 21. Beal played 27. Otto Porter only played 26. And I think Markieff Morris played 20. And Howard only played 20. It was just the game was over basically from the beginning. And he's going to play 30 minutes in a close game. And he's down to 5,700. So yeah, I'm sticking with him here. I also think Marc Gasol at 7,400 is a strong play. This position has just given us so much depth recently, Dan. Yusuf Nurkic, the price has come up. I'm not huge on that because the minutes are concerning, but he played 35 minutes last game. Game prior to that played 28 minutes. Nurkic dropped 54.5 fantasy points last game in 35 minutes. Man, if we're going to start seeing big run from him, then you best be putting him in your lineups. Not to mention that against Minnesota, Terry Stotts would be wise to play his biggest, most talented center and have him on the court. You know, Towns might jack up a few 3-pointers, but he's not hanging out at the behind the arc like Brooke Lopez is. You know,
Sure.
So I don't think that's a huge deal. We'll see, but hey, we know how Terry Stotts works with Nurkic, and it's frustrating. But he's such a high upside player. He's averaging a ridiculous, like, his per minute production this season is 1.4 fantasy points per minute, which is amazing for a guy that's playing 26 minutes per game. So I really like him here. I don't think there's really any argument. And remember, Ed Davis, if Hollis Jefferson and Jared Allen are out, I think that's a long shot, but we got to throw him in there. He's played 38 minutes over his last 2 games, and he's got 53 fantasy points. We know that he's got upside from a per minute standpoint as well. A lot of this will come down to injuries for sure. We'll keep close watch on that. I'll write everything up. I always, throw annotations in there, or I always make notes of potential injuries and things that are going to shift how the slate works. And another one that I think people are going to overlook, Rudy Gobert against Philly. Embiid is a very good defender, but this team has not defended centers well as a team. The Sixers haven't defended centers well as a team this year. And amazingly enough, through a month into the season, they are allowing the most points to opposing centers. They're allowing the second most rebounds. They're allowing, in terms of blocks, you're getting the second most blocks, field goal attempts, Dan, most field goal attempts, and of course, the highest efficiency to centers. Rudy Gobert's price is coming down. He's below 8K. He's at 7,500, the cheapest he's been since 10/28. Rudy Gobert is really, really appealing to me here, and I think he will gobble up plenty of rebounds and clean up around the rim.
All right. Now, I do want to ask you, as I said at the top, don't forget, if you are listening to this podcast and not yet an Awesemo.com member, use the promo code EARLYBIRD. It gets you 1 week free, and that's all the bells and whistles over there at Awesemo.com. Free shows over on YouTube. You get the NBA Strategy Show in the morning. You get A to B, which is Andrew and Ben breaking down NFL and PGA in the midday, and then you have the Deeper Dive typically at 5 p.m. and live up until lock live up until lock. And then Dave and I have been discussing whether or not to do this show live on some nights when we're doing it. So we may bring that into the fold as well. I toyed with bringing DFS Tonight back, which I did previously at FanVice. This might be down that road, but we'll figure it all out. With that said, wanted to get your take here across sort of the top tier. Let's say maybe 10K or above. Do you feel, well, let's do this. One, going through the slate like we just did, do you feel like it's stud, stars and scrubs, or do you feel like it's a balanced night? And then if you look at 10K or above, is there a specific stud that you will, at right now, as we record, think you'd be building around with lineup construction?
Yeah, right now there just isn't a lot of surefire value, surefire punts that have you feeling good. There might be Kevin Knox, who is a risk in his own right. Again, you want to play Alan Crabb or something. Those guys aren't going to make you feel very comfortable. So as you said, right now, assuming that Hollis Jefferson and Allen are playing, assuming that everyone who's questionable is going to play, I am really torn between Giannis and Davis. Both of them have teams that are double-digit favorites, playing really, really bad teams that could get roasted all game long, and they don't play in the fourth. But it's really both of those guys for me, Dan. I don't have a clear lean towards either one, and I'm probably going to have a pretty equal amount of both of them, given that they're the same price point, while $100 separated, and both have monster ceilings. If you force me to choose one, I would go Giannis here.
Okay.
But I really do like Davis as well, above 10K.
All right. Well, we will leave it there. As Dave said, he has the deep dive write-up. That is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And, of course, today being Friday, you can check that out at awesemo.com. You can find him on Twitter at Lofty_D. Find me. Oh, wait, that's LOUGHY_D. Find me at Dan Strafford. And, of course, it's at awesemo_com. You get EMAC and Adam on Saturday morning. Dave and I are back on Monday morning with the DFS Early Bird. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you back here on awesemo.com's The DFS Early Bird.